So the subject of my thesis is the relationship between religious and multicultural identity in the context of multiple identities, the case of Christian Arabs in Israel. This is an exploratory research that addresses two main questions. The first one is to examine the structure of identities among Christian Arabs in Israel, the group of double minority, the minority within Muslim majority and the minority within Jewish majority. The second goal is to examine the relationship between elements of religiosity and different identities and integrations, as I will describe later. We had 222 Christian Arabs living in Israel with ages between 18 to 35, with the 95 males and 127 females. The participants were sampled based on personal acquaintance, but the final sample were heterogeneous because we sampled the participants from diverse villages. They filled online questionnaires that we sent in mails. In this research, we had three main components: religiosity, identities, and bicultural identity integrations. We examined the religiosity based on the 4Bs model of Saroglu. This model includes four elements of religiosity: the believing, bonding, behaving, and belonging. 4Bs. Now I'll give brief description of the elements. The believing element is an universal element of religiosity. Refers to the belief in an external transcendence, the believing in the existence of something larger and more important than all humans. The bonding element refers to the emotions and self-transcendent experience that bonds the individual with others, with the reality, with his inner self. In general, this experience occurs during a ritualized framework or religious ceremonies. The behaving aspect refers to the norms and moral arguments defining right and wrong from a religious perspective. There is some overlap between these norms and the social norms, but with the more rigid standards in the religiosity norms. The belonging refers to the feeling of being part of a group or community. Now, how do we measure religiosity? We use the 4Bs questionnaire of Saroglu. This questionnaire includes 12 items, 3 items for each religiosity element, with 1 to 7 scale answers, when 1 is totally disagree and 7 is totally agree. Here are 2 examples of the 2 items from the questionnaire. In religion, I enjoy belonging to a group or community. This item is one of the 3 items that measure the belonging element. The second one is I like religious ceremonies. In addition to Saroglu's questionnaire, we added 3 more items that measure the practical aspect of behavior. As I described, the behaving dimension of the 4Bs model refers to the moral norms and standards of behaving and not to the practical aspect of behaving. That's why we decided to add some questions that measure this aspect of behavior. For example, how often do you go to church? So with the 4 dimensions of the 4Bs model plus the new element of the practical aspect of behavior, we had 5 dimensions of religiosity: the believing, bonding, belonging, moral, and behaving. But we made some change or switch in the names of the dimensions. The moral dimension here refers to the behaving dimension of the 4Bs model. So, but we decided to change its name because this dimension measures the moral standards of behavior, and we decided to give the behaving name to the new element that we added, the practical meaning of behavior. the measurement of BII and identities, the bicultural identity integration. We measure the bicultural identity integration using the Bennett-Martinez questionnaire that includes 12 items measuring the integration between two identities with 1 to 5 scale, when 1 is absolutely don't agree, 1 to 6, and 6 I totally agree. The participants answered the 12 questions twice. The first time in order to measure the bicultural identity integration respecting the Christian and Arab identities, and the second time respecting the Christian Israeli identities. Here are 2 examples of this questionnaire. For example, I rarely feel conflicted about being Arab and Christian, or I don't blend my Israeli and Christian cultures. So, results. We conducted a series of multivariate analyses such as factor analysis and multivariate regressions, but today, for the sake of simplicity, we will present the findings mainly in terms of comparisons between means and bivariate correlations. I'm going to present briefly the results regarding the identities and the bicultural identity integrations, and after that the results respecting the religiosity. As we can see, we found significant differences between the 3 identities. So the Christian Arabs in Israel has the Christian identity as the strongest one, followed by the Arab identity, and after that by the Israeli identity, that is the weakest one, and all the differences between the 3 identities were significant. The correlations among the 3 identities. We found, as we can see, we found a positive significant correlation between the Christian identity and the Israeli identity, and negative, even if weak, but negative significant correlation between the Arab identity and Israeli identity, and not significant correlation between the Arab identity and the Christian identity. The identity integration. We found that the difference between the Christian Israeli integration and the Christian Arab integration was significant, with the Christian Arab integration as the stronger than the Christian Israeli integration. So the Christian Arabs in Israel can integrate better between the Christian and Arab identities than they do so between the Christian Israeli integration. We also found significant negative correlation between the 2 types of integrations. It's weak, but it's significant. Now I'm going to present the correlations between the religiosity and identities, and after that the correlations between religiosity and the bicultural identity integrations. As we can see in the first column, we found a positive and strong and positive significant correlations between Christian identity and the 5 elements of religiosity. In the second column we have also similar results. We found positive significant correlations between Israeli identity and the 5 elements of religiosity, but of course the correlations here were weakest. And we didn't find a significant correlations between the Arab identity and the belonging, bonding, and believing in the first 3 elements, but we found a negative significant correlation with the moral and behaving dimensions. The relationship between religiosity and the integrations, we didn't find any correlation between Arab Christian integration with the 5 elements of religiosity, and but we found positive significant correlation between the Israeli Christian identity with the belonging, believing, moral, and behaving, almost with the all almost with every dimension. Conclusions. I just wrote 3 points for thought points. It's not exactly the conclusion from the research. A dominant religious component in the Christian ethno-religious identity. As we know, the Christian identity is defined or thought to be ethno-religious identity, but the findings of the strong and high correlations between the Christian identity and the 5 elements of religiosity made us think about the possibility that the religious component in the ethno-religious identity is more dominant. The second point, is Israeli identity more allowing Christian religiosity than Arab identity? As we could see, we found a positive, positive relationships between Israeli identity and all the elements of religiosity, and between the Christian Israeli integration and almost all elements of religiosity. But we didn't find such findings regarding the Arab identity. So this is a question. Maybe that made us think about the possibility that maybe the Israeli culture is more allowing Christian people to be religious than the Arab identity, that maybe is more threatening the Christians' religiosity. Strong Arab identity is accompanied with resistance to factionalism and to the external expressions of religiosity. What made me think about this point is the finding that the Arab identity was correlated with believing, bonding, and belonging, was not correlated with believing, bonding, and belonging, but it was significantly correlated, negative correlation, with the moral and behaving aspects. That is, it's significantly negative correlated with the elements that are more visible, with the elements that are more expressible of religiosity, and not with the 3 first elements that are more inner or maybe not visible, like the behaving aspects. So this finding can indicate or maybe be explained by that the stronger the Arab identity is, the more we resist to the external expressions of religiosity, because these can cause to a division within the Arab community. These points are thought points. I'm not sure about if these points are true or false, but it's sorry. These points are I'm not sure if these points are true or false, but we can think about it together. Thank you.
I know you are I think you are exhausted and probably starving, but I promise I will be brief. Well, today I will tell a brief story about the story of and behind my thesis. It's about identities, bicultural identity integration, and values among Christian Arab in Israel. Well, me and my colleague Natalie, we share Gabriel Rinchik as our supervisor and mentor. So we have an overlap in some of the variables, such as identities and bicultural identity integration. So to spare you from boredom of repetition, I will focus mainly on the part of identities. Okay. Am I right? Oh, no. Okay, it's the other way. So when I say values, what do I mean by values, and what are values? So values are these elements in life that are personally important and worthwhile. In many ways, they are aligned with belief and belief system. Values are considered to be subjective and may vary across individuals and cultures. So different cultures reflect values differently and to different levels of emphasis. For example, the Arab culture is characterized by conservative values regarding sexuality, whereas Western cultures are more liberal about it. Okay. So, number of research in the field has inspired us to conduct studies, such as Schwartz. He has conducted many research showing the importance of values in characterizing cultural groups. In Munir's PhD dissertation, as he himself mentioned yesterday, well, he conducted a research among a group of Christian Arab adolescents in Israel. As you already know, this group is exposed to a number of cultures, such as the Israeli Jewish culture, the Arab Christian culture, the Arab Muslim culture, and to Western cultures. So he used values for their importance in identifying cultural groups and cultural differences to investigate the different cultures this minority is exposed to. So this methodology helps us to map various cultures and the place of self within this cultural space, or this this cultural space from the respondent's perspective. Moreover, in Munir and Horinchik, they already mentioned that yesterday, I think. They conducted a study on a group of Christian Arab adolescents. Well, they tried to look for a acculturation pattern among this group. So in order to understand the way they perceive themselves and others, they use values such as spiritual life, belongingness, freedom, and more that supposedly represent the Arab Christian group adolescents in Israel. Research questions. We have two main questions in this research. So the first one is the differences between values and correlationships between values. And the second one is correlationship between values and bicultural identity integration. So first for values and Christian Israeli integration, and values and Christian Arab integration. In order to measure values, we exploratively built a values questionnaire. We had sources from different researchers in the field, such as unpublished work of Binet Martinez and Santana, which included values of feminism, gender equality, respect for elders, and time punctuality. Well, I'm having a hard time with that, I'm sorry. Values from the work of Schwartz, which included achievement, independency, and prestige. It's not working for me. And the value of security from Vecchione and others. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. And values added by us: openness in relationship, freedom of relationships, acceptance of other religions, freedom of women, individualism, and collectivism. So it is important to note that the use of these specific values was derived from the fact that they seem to us as particularly relevant to population under study. This is an example of how the values questionnaire looks like. So next to each value, we ask participants to express the degree to which he or she thinks of the value as important to Arab Christian culture, Arab Muslim culture, Israeli Jewish culture, and to self. On a scale ranging from 1, contradicts his values, to 7 as the most important value. although we did ask participants to attribute values to different cultures, but in this presentation, I will focus mainly on self-endorsed values, to which degree I attribute each of the values. Moreover, as Natalie has mentioned before me, we did conduct a series of multivariate analysis, factor analysis, regression, multiple regressions, but today, for the sake of simplicity, we will focus mainly on comparisons between means and bivariant correlations. Unfortunately, I could not spare you from the factor analysis on the of the 15 items on the questionnaire, on the values questionnaire. So the factor analysis has revealed 3 main factors, which were interpreted as values of individualism, values of collectivism, and values of relationships. And to the results. So, differences between values, as you see, the highest one is collectivistic values, followed by individualistic values, and the last, relationship values. So, that means that values tend to go together. Some people are value-oriented, while others are not. So, in other words, a person can be collectivistic values oriented without contradicting with the fact that he can also be an individualistic values oriented. For the correlationships among values, so all the correlationships were significant, although weak. And now a brief lesson on statistics. So the beta value is similar to a number of correlation coefficients that were mentioned often in this conference. So the higher the beta value, the more it contributes to the prediction. The sign of the beta value, plus or minus, shows the direction of the prediction, and the p-value should be lower than 0.05 in order for the prediction to be significant. So in this situation, as you see, only the p-value of Christian-Israeli integration was to be significant. So collectivism is negatively and significantly correlated with Christian-Israeli integration. So the more the collectivism is endorsed by respondents, the less there is an integration between Israeli and Christian identities. Individualism is positively and significantly correlated with it, and relationships is negatively correlated with it. Conclusion. Well, even if the differences between the values are not high, but there is a slight preference toward collectivistic values. Well, as I indicated earlier, we did ask participants to attribute values to other cultures. I did not go into these details in this presentation, but finding from this part of the questionnaire shows that Christian Arabs tend to see Israeli culture as more individualistic than collectivistic. So a compatibility between my individualistic values and the individualistic values I attribute to Israeli culture, society, help me to better integrate the Christian Israeli components of my identity. Whereas an incompatibility between my collectivistic values and the individualistic values I attribute to Israeli society interferes with my integration of the Christian Israeli components of my identity. Thank you very much.